Some of you are miserable, not because you're broken, but because you're hiding what God designed you to be. You're not lost, you're just running from the call that scares you the most. I remember sitting at a dinner party once, the kind where everything looks perfect on the outside. The table was set just right, the laughter sounded real, and the wine was flowing. But in the middle of it all, I felt like I was slowly disappearing. It was this strange, hollow ache in my chest, like I was watching myself through a glass window. Everyone thought I was living the dream. They saw someone accomplished, well-spoken, put together, but inside, I felt like a stranger in my own story. I wasn't depressed, I wasn't lost, I was simply disconnected from my own purpose. There's this lie we learned so early, that if we just do what's expected of us, we'll be okay. That if we make the right people proud, if we don't make waves, if we keep checking boxes, we'll feel whole. But what they don't tell you is that pretending comes with a cost. And for me, the cost was peace. There's a quiet kind of suffering that comes from living a life that isn't yours, a slow erosion of self. It doesn't scream, it whispers, it shows up as burnout you can't explain, as irritation with people you love, as sadness in moments that should be joyful. It's the soul's way of saying, this isn't home, but we keep going, performing, because the truth is we're terrified, not of failing, but of becoming. Because becoming will ask you to let go of the version of you that made everyone comfortable. And comfort, even when it's killing us, can feel safer than change. I think about all the people I've met who were quietly aching, successful on the outside, but spiritually homeless on the inside. They weren't miserable because they lacked talent or opportunity. They were miserable because they were ignoring the one thing that actually mattered, the call deep inside their chest. In psychology, there's a term, cognitive dissonance. It's the tension that happens when your actions are out of sync with your values or truth. And if you live in that space long enough, your body will keep the score. You'll feel it in your sleep, in your energy, in your relationships, because the soul doesn't lie, even when your mouth does. And yet, every time you betray your own purpose to keep the peace, you don't just lose time, you lose yourself. I'll never forget what I whispered to myself that night, alone in my car after the dinner party. This is not the life you were made for. It was the first honest sentence I'd said to myself in months, and it broke me, in the best way. Because sometimes the truth has to break you before it can build you. You don't need to figure it all out today, but you do need to stop pretending that you're fine living a life that doesn't belong to you. You don't need to find your purpose. You need to stop abandoning it. A woman came up to me after a talk once, maybe in her late 30s, soft-spoken, eyes filled with that fragile mix of hope and hesitation. And she said, I know what I'm meant to do. I've always known. But I just don't think I'm holy enough to do it. Her voice cracked on the word holy. I sat with her, let the silence breathe. Then I gently asked, do you think God only uses the spotless? And she looked at me, eyes wide like I'd just said something radical. I said, I don't think God only uses the spotless. And she looked at me, eyes wide like I just said something radical. But it's not radical. It's the truth we keep forgetting. We've been told, directly or indirectly, that we have to be ready before we can be used, that we need to be more spiritual, more polished, more healed. And so we wait. We keep waiting for the pain to go away, for the insecurity to dissolve, for the fear to quiet down. But all the while, purpose is waiting for us to move. Let me say it plainly. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. But that truth terrifies us because it means the invitation might show up, before the confidence does. It means we might have to say yes while our hands are shaking. It means we might have to stand on a platform while we still feel like a mess inside. And that's the part we don't want to admit. Most of us aren't avoiding purpose because we're lazy. We're avoiding it because we feel unworthy. Shame is the quiet saboteur of purpose. It whispers, "Who do you think you are? You failed too many times. You're too broken, too late, too far gone." And slowly it convinces you that maybe your purpose was a childhood fantasy, not something God actually meant for you. But here's the thing. Shame will always try to shrink you into a life that looks safer, smaller, more acceptable. And if you listen to it long enough, you'll end up performing for people instead of obeying God. The truth is, the people we admire, the ones walking fully in their calling, they didn't get there because they were fearless. They got there because they stopped letting shame write their story. In my own life, I've learned that purpose doesn't wait for the day you feel ready. It shows up in the middle of your undoing. God meets you in the middle of your mess, not at the finish line. Because He's not looking for a performance, He's looking for surrender. There's a reason the Bible is filled with people who had no business leading anything. Moses had a stutter. David was an adulterer. Peter denied Jesus. Mary was a teenager. Paul persecuted Christians. And still, God called them, used them, worked through their flaws. Not in spite of them, but because of them. Because when God uses the broken, no one can take credit but Him. Shame says, "You're not enough." Grace says, "I'll make you enough." And purpose says, "Go anyway." In the world of psychology, we know that shame disconnects us from ourselves and others. It isolates. It builds walls. But the moment we name it, bring it into the light, it loses power. Vulnerability is what makes healing possible. And healing is what makes obedience sustainable. So maybe you don't need another sign. Maybe the fear you feel is not a stop sign. Maybe it's the confirmation that you're on sacred ground. And maybe, just maybe, your calling wasn't supposed to make sense. Maybe it was just supposed to make you move. You don't need to be flawless to walk in purpose. You need to be available. Because God doesn't anoint perfection. He anoints the willing. And your yes, right now, trembling and unsure, might be the exact offering heaven's been waiting for. When I first started speaking from a place of raw truth, not just the polished professional version, but the deep, messy, tear-streaked places, I would walk off stage and immediately feel sick to my stomach. Not because I regretted what I said, but because I knew I had just let people see me, and that kind of exposure, it's terrifying. Not everyone is afraid of failing, but almost everyone I know is afraid of being seen. Truly seen. Stripped of the masks, void of the performance. Standing there as your full, unedited self. I had a friend once. Smart, deeply empathetic, gifted beyond words. She would light up every room she entered. But when I asked why she wasn't pursuing the calling she felt so strongly in her bones, she looked down and said, "Because once I step into it, I can't hide anymore. People will finally see me, and what if they don't like what they see?" And I got it. I really got it. Because purpose doesn't just pull you toward your calling, it pulls you out of hiding. And that feels like standing naked in front of a crowd with all your insecurities stitched to your skin. People often say they're afraid of failure, but more often, they're afraid of visibility, afraid of their gifts being misunderstood, afraid of their vulnerability being used against them, afraid of shining too brightly and triggering someone else's discomfort. There's a sacred kind of fear in stepping into your calling because it costs you the ability to blend in. Psychologically, our brains are wired for safety. And safety for most of us has looked like conformity, belonging through sameness, approval through compliance. And when you start stepping into your purpose, you challenge that entire system. You disrupt the unspoken agreement that says, I'll stay small if you love me for it. But the truth is, the calling on your life will always be louder than the comfort you built to survive. Purpose will ask you to use the very parts of you've tried to hide. The softness you thought was weakness, the grief you thought disqualified you, the story you swore you'd never tell. And the moment you start showing up in your truth, you will feel the quake of exposure. But it's not punishment, it's confirmation. When I began speaking vulnerably about shame, heartbreak, faith, trauma, there were nights I'd cry afterward, not because I regretted it, but because it felt like emotional whiplash. The part of me that had been trained to protect my image was screaming, "Why did you let them see that?" But the part of me that knew I was finally walking in truth whispered back, "Because that's the only way to be free." There's no shortcut here. Walking in purpose will make you feel like you're walking around without armor. But what if that's the point? What if purpose requires us to be bare-hearted, not because it's easy, but because it's the only way to connect? Psychology tells us that vulnerability is the birthplace of belonging, but it's also the birthplace of purpose. And until we're willing to be seen, fully, messily, honestly, we will never feel whole. Let me say something that might scare you. Your purpose lives in the parts of you you're most afraid to share. Not the curated you, not the filtered version, but the real, unfiltered, still healing you. And no, not everyone will understand. Some will look away, some will mislabel your transparency as weakness. But the ones who matter, the ones you're meant to reach, they will find freedom in your honesty. Because when you step into your God-given purpose, you give other people permission to stop hiding too. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real point. Not to be impressive, but to be real. Not to be applauded, but to be seen. Not to be safe, but to be used. Your gifts were never meant to be buried beneath fear. And the world doesn't need another perfect performance. It needs your presence, imperfect, honest, whole. Because the most powerful thing you'll ever do is let yourself be seen. There's a type of grief no one prepares you for. The grief that comes from becoming someone new. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, quiet, and mostly invisible. You start to notice it in your conversations, in the way your laughter feels different, in the silence after you say something honest and the room goes cold. You don't cry because something terrible happened. You cry because something true is waking up inside of you, and it no longer fits the life you built around who you used to be. When I began truly walking in my purpose, not the version that looked good on paper, but the one that made my voice shake and my hands tremble, I started losing people, not in dramatic breakups or loud betrayals, but in distance, in discomfort. In those awkward conversations where people say, "You've changed," and don't mean it as a compliment. And they were right, I had changed. Because when you stop betraying yourself to make other people comfortable, the relationship dynamic shifts. You stop laughing at things that aren't funny. You stop agreeing to things that drain you. You stop apologizing for being the fullest version of who God made you to be. And that shift, that reclaiming of self, often comes with loss. No one tells you that purpose and grief are twins, that when you say yes to what's next, you often have to say goodbye to what was, to friendships that were built on your silence, to roles that were never meant to hold your whole heart, to habits and patterns that numbed the ache of not living in truth. I remember waking up one morning after I had made a huge leap toward what I knew God was calling me to do. I had let go of a role, a title, a community I once held close. I should have felt proud, but I felt gutted. And I asked myself, why does walking in truth feel so much like loss? And I realized, because it is. Stepping into purpose means shedding identities that were built for survival, not authenticity. It means bearing the masks that once protected you, but now only suffocate. And like any death, even a necessary one, it hurts. Psychologists talk about identity loss and the grief it brings. It's not just emotional, it's physical, mental, spiritual. When you start becoming who you're called to be, your nervous system doesn't throw you a party. It panics because your brain is hardwired to seek safety, not transformation. And growth, for all its beauty, feels dangerous at first. But here's what I need you to know. Outgrowing your old life doesn't make you a traitor. It makes you obedient. You were never meant to stay in spaces that punish your evolution. You were never meant to keep choosing peace if it cost your soul. You were never meant to shrink so others could breathe easier. There is heartbreak in becoming, but there's also freedom. Because for the first time, your outer world begins to reflect your inner truth. I want to say this to the part of you that feels guilty for changing. You are allowed to grieve what you've outgrown. You are allowed to love who you were and still let her go. You are allowed to bless the past without staying chained to it. Your calling will not always come with celebration. Sometimes it comes with quiet exits and deep sighs. But don't mistake loneliness for wrongness. Sometimes purpose looks like walking away from the crowd so you can finally walk with God. And the grief, it's not a sign that you messed up. It's a sign that you're doing it right. Because becoming isn't clean, it's sacred. And it often begins with letting go of everything that once felt like home, so you can finally build the one you were meant for. We love the idea of purpose, the promise, the impact, the meaning. But no one really talks about how unclear it often feels in the beginning, how lonely it is to step out in faith when everything inside of you is begging for a sign, a map, a guarantee. I used to think purpose would arrive like a lightning bolt, bold, obvious, undeniable. But in my experience, it often shows up in whispers, gentle nudges, doors you didn't expect to open, conversations you can't shake, restlessness that won't let you sleep. And still we resist. Because it doesn't make sense, because we can't see the full picture, because it doesn't feel safe. There was a woman I met once after a workshop. She looked me straight in the eyes, tears welling up, and said, "I think I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm terrified it'll cost me everything." Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I remember holding space for that moment, for the raw truth in her fear. Because she wasn't being dramatic. She was being honest. Stepping into purpose will cost you. It'll cost your certainty, your carefully managed image, your timeline, sometimes even your community. Because when God gives you a calling, it doesn't come with step-by-step instructions. It comes with a burden, and you have to decide if you're going to carry it. Obedience is not glamorous. It doesn't always come with clarity. In fact, I've learned that the most meaningful steps I've taken toward my calling were the ones I took without a plan. Just a whisper in my spirit that said, "This is it. Go." But the part of us that craves control screams in moments like that. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if they laugh? What if I lose everything? And yet, the deeper voice, the Holy One, keeps whispering, "Trust me." In psychology, there's a term called intuitive dissonance. That feeling when what you know in your gut contradicts what you can logically prove. It's why obedience to calling often feels like madness to everyone else, and even to yourself. You might look around and see people building safe, predictable lives, and that's okay. But you were marked for something different. And that ache you feel when you try to live like everyone else, that's your spirit refusing to settle for a life that doesn't align with your assignment. There's this moment in Scripture where Abraham is told to leave everything familiar, his country, his people, his father's household, and just go. No map, no destination, just trust, just obedience. And that's what courage actually looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move while you're still afraid. I used to think faith meant confidence. Now I know it means surrender. You don't get to see the whole picture before you step. You don't get to guarantee the outcome before you begin. You don't get applause before obedience. You just get the chance to say yes, and that yes, it's enough. It's how every great story begins, not with certainty, but with courage. Because in the end, God isn't looking for people who have it all figured out. He's looking for people willing to move anyway, people who trust His voice more than their fear, people who say, even if I'm scared, I'll still go. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to stop waiting for the fear to disappear before you start. Because here's the truth no one says out loud. Courage doesn't come before calling. It comes with it. And every time you say yes in the dark, every time you choose obedience over certainty, you're not just stepping into your purpose, you're stepping into the arms of the one who wrote it. You don't need clarity, you need trust, you need heart. You need the faith to say, God, I don't know what's next, but I trust you more than I trust what I can see. That's where purpose lives, right there, in the wild, holy, trembling yes. You were born on purpose, for a purpose, not to impress, but to impact, not to fit in, but to set people free. And the day you stop hiding is the day heaven starts moving through you. Step in, show up, surrender. Your purpose is waiting, and it's not too late.